Christian will start us. Oh,
All right. Welcome to our podcast, and we will be talking about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. And the biggest thing I saw that related to all of our lenses was the fog. Bromden talks about countless times over and over again about how the fog is rolling into this hospital and he can't see when it's there, but he also feels like it's safe in there. But what is the fog? What do we actually know about this fog?
I think the fog is a metaphor for like his struggle with his own insanity.
Yeah.
It's definitely one standpoint. From like a literal sense of what it seems like in the setting and everything, it seems like the fog is kind of his haze of mental health issues. They're because the way Nurse Ratched kind of deals with all of them is she pairs everything against all the patients against each other, and they all have different traumas that are all being brought back against them, and the fog is kind of her way of numbing them to that with medicine, physical torture, the electric chair and the electric table and everything. So that's
Yeah, and going off of medicine, normally when you do have a mental illness, you'd get between different ones, you'd get a specific type of medicine, and she just kind of gives them all the same one,
right,
to make them go numb almost.
And that was a good point, because thinking through a historical lens, back in the 60s, they also didn't have a lot of information on how to treat these mental illnesses, and they were using drugs such as psychedelics like LSD and stuff like that. And that's why I think when he talks about him being fogged up, he can't see, there's at one point in the book where he's talking about it was so fogged up in there he couldn't find his own bed, and he's feeling, I think he was just so drugged up from the nurses, what they just kept giving him.
Yeah, I think it's a hallucinogenic drug that it just affects the way that they think.
Yeah, but going on what Christian said, how they treated people during them, they really didn't know how to treat mental diseases or mental illnesses. It was kind of brand new to them, so they really didn't. They just shoved them into places so that they didn't need to do anything about it, and those people just treated them like trash. But now it's kind of gone better. We know what medicines help with which mental illnesses and that type of stuff.
Yeah. And from the psychological lens also, it's basically these men are not only struggling with their own mental illness and what they're going through, but they're also having to cope with what Nurse Ratched's putting them through to try to fix these things or resolve these things. And when in reality it's making them easily 10 times worse, where they're at mentally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to add in anything with the fog?
yeah. Well, I mean, I'll go off of what Nick said about Nurse Ratched. Just specifically her and how she treats the patients, which it obviously affects them psychologically because of their mental illnesses. I mean, Nurse Ratched, specifically her and Mick Murphy, they're the dominant forces in this book. But currently, Nurse Ratched holds all the power in this situation that the patients are in. So, I mean, with Nurse Ratched, she's empowered by the mental illnesses that these patients have, and with her being empowered by these patients, she can tend to abuse that power.
Yeah. I have something on that. And when they started to question her power for the World Series, she got, scared and very mad about them. And it says on page 145, of course, is a 50-year-old woman hollering and squealing at the back of their heads about discipline and order and recriminations. they'd have thought the whole bunch was the craziest loons, including Nurse Ratched. And it's kind of like ironic in the sense that like she's the nurse trying to help the mentally ill, but they're also labeling her as crazy.
Yeah.
But then that kind of goes in like she's a woman in power, and this is where she had power, and then they were trying to push against her, and she felt that she was being weak.
Yeah, I feel like in the book when they like challenge her power, she gets very defensive and starts like cracking down on them more, and just I feel like she's actually hurting them more than she's helping them at all.
Yeah, she definitely has a I think a power obsession, because she's put in a place and in a time where women didn't have like much much authority, I guess,
Exactly.
like over others, especially over like an entire ward full of like men. And like
Yeah.
they don't like that very much. They don't like being told like what to do and when to do it by like a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so going on that thing, she treats the patients just like test experiments. Because like the way she said it in page 40, she said the ward is a factory for the Columbine. It's for fixing up mistakes made in the neighborhoods and in the schools and in the churches and the hospitals. When a completed product goes back into society, all fixed up, good as new, better than new, sometimes it brings joy to the big nurse's heart. That's kind of a lie, because all she does is dope them up, because once they go back, they don't know how to cope, and most of them go homeless, which is true in real life as well. When they come back from those type of facilities, since there was no actual real medicine, or that they use shock therapy, they used just dope them up. They were just living to live. They weren't actually doing anything progressive during then. And then again, as Nick said, that she just like tortured them as well with their own traumas as well. So it was kind of just
Yeah.
yeah.
There's another thing that I really like had to look into from a psychological lens is her actual mindset of the oppressor and what that looks like.
Yeah.
And she's basically just boosting her confidence in her own view of self, and she's leveraging like all of these different traumas from these different men, and she's leveraging those and using them to like make them feel small and make her feel big. And that's like one of the big, it's almost like the psychology of the ward is determined by like her headspace.
Yeah. And again, you can look that through a historical lens. Women were oppressed too. And the 60s was a turning point, civil rights, and then also women's suffrage.
Absolutely.
And this could be an example, especially in the beginning of the book, of like her getting power and then her afraid of losing it when McMurphy comes in there and starts talking against her.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
to go off that directly, sorry, I have a quote. I won't interrupt you, Kaylee, but
Go for it.
I just wanted to get this quote thrown in because it's pretty clear to what Christian said. It's when Nurse Ratched, towards the beginning of the book, was like underestimating McMurphy's like power and his own sense of self when she says, "He isn't extraordinary. He is a simple man and no more. He is a subject to all the fears and all the cowardices and the timidity that any other man is subject to." So she's basically trying to like, he knows he's empowered and he has a sense of self, and she's trying to immediately like belittle that and drive that like away.
That's literally the exact same quote that I was about to read.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. You said it
So
basically
that
the
also
same way that I was going to as well, though.
I went off Nick real quick. I just want to add one more thing. Just about McMurphy. Something that I liked on page 63 was when McMurphy and Harding were talking about Miss Ratched and how Harding's saying, "Oh, she's not that bad. She's pretty nice," and McMurphy saying, "Oh no, she's not a saint at all." Um, Harding notices from McMurphy's aggressive behavior. He says, "Friend, you may be a wolf," and this upsets McMurphy because he doesn't see himself like that. But to very early on in the book, you know, other patients in the ward are starting to see him as this prominent figure um, that they're with because of just his aggressive nature towards Miss Ratchet. And I mean, McMurphy, I mean, he challenges her authority, and that also leads him to become another dominant figure in the book, which I like.
Yeah, so going on to what Nick said, he was basically, I don't know why he was so upset about that, but there was something he said in part two. I don't have the exact like page number. He said that he didn't like being under a matriarchy. So I think that goes along with what Christian said as well, that he did not like being underneath like a woman's power, because during that time men were still like, I would say, a little more superior, because women were just, it was the boom that they got more jobs, they had a lot more access and a lot more just then. So it kind of just shows how he he viewed her kind of as like, I don't know, he viewed her as kind of a serpent, or kind of like a snake in that way, that how she got her power in that.
Most definitely.
So I have a quote about her like overreaching and abusing her power. This one's from Bromden. And he said, "All this morning I've been waiting for them to fog us in again. The last few days they've been doing it more and more." This is like when McMurphy started challenging uh, the nurse's power. They
Yeah.
started fogging more and more as some of the patients were like realizing how like aggressive she's been, and like how cracking down on the rules she has been. So they just started fogging them so they couldn't think for themselves.
I kind of want to jump into how the mental patients are treated, and also what's considered a mental illness. Like, but we keep talking about this fog, and some of us talk about how it's like like medicated induced like fog brain, and like how like in the 60s when they're treating these patients, does that make sense? Like, we have certain patients like Bromden, who I believe is like a PTSD patient. I mean, and then Billy Bibbit, who has a stutter and was suicidal his life because of his torment in his entire life. And McMurphy, who doesn't really seem to be mentally ill. And to me, like, he just seems like an aggressive guy.
Yeah.
But they all get treated with this, like we said before, like similar medication. And like Pete, I've talked about him before. He was a big grown man who had the mind of like a 6-year-old, and he was tired, and they keep him up, and then he acted up and ended up hitting one of the workers, and so they give him the shot that makes him all fogged up, cloudy, unresponsive. It is. How do you think that's like? Why would they treat mental illness patients like that? That's what I'm trying to ask. Like,
I feel like they're like treating everyone as they're a test. Like they have a bunch of different mental illnesses and they're all on a different spectrum, but they're all getting the same treatment, which is like super wrong to think about. But I think they're just being used as like lab rats, see what happens with their control.
Yeah, the thing. After you, Nick.
No, I'll make it quick. It's just because from the psychological lens, it's really a matter of like, it's breaking down these men based on like Nick, I remember you saying this previous about how everyone can be beaten. It's just a matter of how. And it's just like all these men have these different things that can trigger them to break down and cause them to have doubt in their own like morality and all these different things. And it's hard to decipher like what's really taking effect on them when they're being misdiagnosed constantly. Because you were saying as a stutter, could be easily misdiagnosed as some form of anxiety and then given X, Y, and Z in medication. And that really played into almost every patient in the book.
Yeah, no, the thing I like that on was the Christian just about the treatments. Nurse Ratchet, she uh, consistently tells McMurphy about just certain treatments, such as the music that plays in the background of the ward,
Yeah.
uh, stuff like that. She tells him that it's all therapeutic, for the patients, so they can help them and whatnot. But um, I mean, in a sense, the nurse, as a normal person, you would feel that a lot of these things they're not morally, they're morally wrong. Um,
Right.
Nothing seems normal about it. But Nurse Ratchet, she doesn't have some type of moral compass, and nobody challenges that in the book. Um, from her position because the doctors don't challenge it, and the only one to challenge it is McMurphy due to her power.
I have a quote for what you're saying right there. So about how the uses of, like, even not even it's just like not medicine, but like the shock therapy, the hydrotherapy, frontal lobotomies, even just that music that she's playing. Like McMurphy says, can you even ease down the volume? It ain't like the whole state of Oregon needed to hear Lawrence Welk play T for Two 3 times every hour. Page 105. Um, these practices, like imagine like in this room every single day of your life, and they play this song 3 times every hour, being drugged up, being in traumatizing situations. That kind of doesn't seem like it would be helping someone. It seems like it would cause more mental illness than, like, I don't know if this is not the right word, but more trauma than getting rehabilitated in a hospital should be.
That'd just
It's,
be making it worse.
That
and
just
like,
causes her to have, like, to make those people stay there longer because she knows that she can control them versus
yeah,
having to bring someone who's new in and having to start off the cycle all over again.
But going to that main question, how you're saying what was considered a mental illness? So during that time in 1960, what truly was a mental illness to everybody, according to BBC.com, it was just whatever people thought was abnormal or what some people would do. Like take Billy for example. He just had a stutter, but the reason he went in there is because people pushed him to the edge that he became suicidal, and he wanted to just protect himself, right?
Yeah. And a really big thing to go off of what Ender was just saying is just kind of the way that like Nurse Ratchet really broke these men down to like their, and she kept them not only at a weakened mental state but a weakened physical state, because a lot of these conditions and illnesses that were being brought on by her treatments were actually having physical like consequences, and they were leaving the men nauseous and confused and dazed, which just adds to the fog in general. But it also really like shows that they've been broken and she keeps them broken instead of fixing them.
yeah.
Well, I just think that shows her psychological thing that she needs to show her power over people.
Yeah. And it's just as in the way that like mental illness in this ward was determined by her and what her view of like mental illness was really, because there's a quote when Harding says the doctor doesn't hold the power of hiring and firing. That power goes to the supervisor, who is a dear friend of old Miss Ratchet's, which is kind of showing that she really does have a grasp on every aspect of what's going on in these men's lives, just so it can fit to her view of what's considered normal.
Yeah, she even tells Billy that she's friends with his mom and that she can report back to him every time, like anytime. And I think kind of a theme here is that the women in this book kind of are like they use fear to control the men. Like Billy's mother, Harding's wife, and Nurse Ratched.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I
so
think I might have to stop the recording.
I'll save it real quick.
Yeah.
All right. I think that was a good session.
done.
Yeah. And then I'll just send you guys the rest.
All right.